What's up guys, hope you're having a good day. I would like to start this video by saying a massive thank you to Mr. Jacqueline Buckley, who came through for us in a huge way when we bet him in the last YouTube video that I dropped. We researched the fight between Buckley and Alex Morono, identified Buckley would have pretty big advantages over Morono everywhere, and he certainly showed that in that fight because he looked outstanding, he performed really well. And yeah, I think Buckley's got a pretty bright future in that welterweight division. He's a little bit raw, he's a little bit wild, he's a little bit reckless, but he's still very young, and he's only going to be getting better and better from fight to fight. So thank you, Mr. Buckley, for that. Also want to remind you guys, there's currently spaces available in my live betting group. You can see here in the profitability chart that we make a profit on live betting UFC almost every month. It is my bread and butter, it is my speciality, it is what I do best. So if you want to give it a try this weekend, all you need to do is head on over to my website, MMABettingTips.com. You'll find a link for that in the description below. Scroll down and you can sign up just by clicking here on in-play membership. Now, you're probably wondering what live betting is, what you kind of get with my service. So now I'm going to play a little bit of screen capture, a little bit of the audio from my live betting tips from a few weeks ago when we live bet Karolina Kowalkiewicz to beat Diana Belbita. So check it out, and we'll get into the breakdown videos for UFC 294 very soon. If it stays standing, I think this fight is going to be razor close, because while Karolina may outstrike Belbita and, you know, may land more volume, because Karolina doesn't really do any damage, she doesn't have any power in her hands, I think this could be one of those situations where Belbita does the damage, lands the hard, impactful shots, whereas Karolina's got the volume, and it ends up being like a razor close fight. So we'll see how it goes, man. I do think it's got the potential to be close. Like I say, Belbita isn't good, but she's 10 years younger, she's stronger, she's bigger, she's more powerful, and that can be a great equalizer. But we know Karolina's going to bring the volume, punches in bunches, constantly touching you. Like we said with Belbita's style, chin tucked, shoulders up high. She's just going to look, oh my word, good googly moogly. Paige Van Zandt style head and arm throw from Diana Belbita. And as Paige Van Zandt found out the hard way, when you use that technique, a lot of the time it just results in you getting your back taken. And Belbita, unfortunately, even though she has purchased the Paige Van Zandt instructional DVD on how to be an MMA fighter, has probably skipped the chapter where it showed Paige getting her back taken pretty much every single time she attempted one of those throws against anyone who was remotely good. But wow, there you see where size and physicality can have an impact on MMA fights. Karolina mounted Belbita, and yet because of the size difference, Belbita was literally able to roll Karolina onto her back. Outrageous. With that, guys, I'm going to recommend a 1-unit bet on Karolina Kowalkiewicz at odds of 1.61. That is 1-unit Kowalkiewicz. I don't want to go too big on her, but 1-unit Kowalkiewicz, 1.61. The reason why I am betting Kowalkiewicz here is because Belbita does have a tendency to slow, and they were absolutely sprinting in that first round. I don't want to go too big on Kowalkiewicz because obviously I have a feeling Belbita won the first round. It's possible she could have improved. Karolina's old, father time, all that kind of stuff. But Karolina's a cardio machine. We know she can go hard for 3 rounds. Belbita typically slows a bit. And we've also seen Karolina use grappling heavy game plans in her last 3 fights. She got a takedown easily at the end of that round there. If Karolina starts to go to her grappling here and Belbita starts to get tired, I think that combination could result in Karolina getting easy takedowns and a lot of grappling control. I don't want to go too big on Karolina because father time is a little bit of a concern. Belbita was having success on the feet, there's no doubt about that. But we've seen Kowalkiewicz use grappling heavy game plans in her last 3 fights.
She got a takedown towards the end of that round. She trains at ATT now. There's no reason why Kowalkiewicz wouldn't go to her wrestling in this second and third at some point. And when she does, with how bad Belbita's takedown defense is and the fact that she just sprinted in round one, good chance Carolina can have a lot of success with grappling in this fight. She's looking for a takedown, looking for an outside trip, doesn't get it. But even just going for the takedowns will force Belbita to exert energy in these positions. You can see Carolina committing hard to the grappling now, which is what we want from her. She will have a big advantage on the ground. Remember, the longer the fight goes, the better it should get for Carolina. She's going to try and hit a single leg off an inside trip here. She doesn't get it. Good job from Belbita stuffing that takedown. At least Carolina's looking for it, and if she persists, she will get it. Carolina persists with her grappling. I think she will get Belbita down. We're already seeing Belbita's volume drop a little here. Like I say, she does have a tendency to slow in fights. Not a massive amount, but when you're fighting at this pace with both these girls sprinting, I mean, every single Karolina Kowalkiewicz fight looks like this. It is not very often that we've seen Belbita in this kind of war. And you can see her output has really dropped off a cliff in this round. And as a result, Carolina's starting to rack up volume. And Belbita's volume is really slowed in this round. She looks a little bit sloppy on her left hand. Her volume is dipped here. Carolina could get a takedown. That would be huge. Carolina doing really good work now in the second half of this round. Starting to put big volume on Belbita. 2 minutes left to go in the round. Minute left to go. I've got Carolina winning this round. She's outworked Belbita in this round. Not super convincing. It is close, but far more end product from Carolina in this round off the jab, and Belbita's volume has noticeably dropped. I do think this is going to be one round apiece. Carolina should take round two, and she is clearly the fresher fighter here. Belbita's volume noticeably dropped in that round, and she also started to get backed up and eat clean, hard shots towards the end of that round. She started to look quite sloppy towards the end of that round, and Carolina started to look really good towards the end of that round. So it's a shame that she gave up that takedown. But yeah, we'll stick at one unit here, guys. Like I say, one unit I think is an appropriate amount of risk here, because it's possible Belbita could be up two. As much as I wouldn't agree with it, you know, we've just been really complimentary of the judges for the way they scored that Demopoulos Murata fight. It would be the universe with their cruel sense of humor if they then go and score round two for Belbita and undo all the work they did in the last fight to score that fight correctly. So Carolina again looking for a takedown here. Belbita obviously wearing a lot more damage on her face now as well. So even if she does start to outstrike Carolina a bit in this final minute, I think that it would be difficult for her to get this round. Busted nose, swollen eye. Carolina not really wearing any damage on her face at the moment. So Carolina's really grown into this fight, and her cardio's always been an asset for her, and you saw that tonight, right? Belbita did great in round one. You know, landed the harder, more impactful shots. She was pushing Carolina back, struggling to, or making it difficult for Carolina to build any momentum. But they were going at such a high pace. You just knew that Belbita wouldn't be able to keep up with Carolina. With 20 seconds left to go. Hopefully the judges score this for Carolina. Like I say, I think they did an excellent job scoring the last fight correctly. It would be a sick sense of humor from the universe if they were to score this one for Belbita, but I don't have much faith in MMA judges, so I wouldn't be surprised. And at the end of the fight, Belbita wearing a lot of damage. I've got that 29-28 Kowalkiewicz. I score round one Belbita, round two Kowalkiewicz, round three Kowalkiewicz. But we'll see, man. Come on, Carolina. Come on, judges. I've got it 29-28 Carolina. I don't think Belbita is a terrible scorecard. I don't think it's the right scorecard. Hopefully the judges do their job. They've been good so far tonight. Hopefully they can keep it going. Belbita looked great though, man. She's only 27 years old. She's a baby in the sport. Come on, judges. No fucking about. Gotta be Carolina. Oh, is it 30-27 unanimous? Wow, all three judges gave it 30-27.
Alright, so there you go. That is basically what it's like in our live betting group. You can hear audio of me commentating the fight as it's happening, and then as soon as a bet pops up that I think is pretty good value, I will let you guys know, and then you can tail it on your betting sites as you're listening to me while watching the fights. As you can see, live betting is something we perform really well on. We make a profit almost every month, and if you want to join us this weekend, just go to my website, MMABettingTips.com, scroll down, click in-play membership, learn more. You can sign up there. If you sign up and you don't like it, no problem. Just send me an email, send me a DM, get in touch with me somehow, and I'll get you a refund. No problem, I'm very accessible. But give it a try, I think you'll like it. Now, let's move into the breakdown videos for UFC 294, and we're going to start off by breaking down the main event between Alexander Volkanovski and Islam Makhachev. We've got a really complex fight to dig into this week. There's a lot of heavy favourites on this card. There probably is going to be a lot of one-sided matchups, but it's the kind of card where, even though we do have a lot of big favourites on many of these fights, I think many of the underdogs can make things very interesting, including Alexander Volkanovski. So let's get into it and take a look at the odds. We can see that Makhachev is around about an average of 1.38, which is going to be minus 263 for an implied probability of 72%. If we take a look at the odds on Volkanovski, he is around about 3.0, which is going to be plus 200 for an implied probability of 33%. So Volkanovski is 35 years old, 5'6" with a 71.5 inch reach. Makhachev, 31 years old, 5'10" with a 70.5 inch reach. So obviously there are a few X factors to talk about here. The first being Volkanovski is stepping up to take this fight on pretty short notice. Now, Volkanovski is obviously a cardio machine and actually, you know, outworked Makhachev in their first fight, where Makhachev started to slow down in that 5th round and Volkanovski finished stronger and looked like the fresher fighter. Will that be the case in this rematch with Volk coming on short notice? I don't know, but what we do know is that we've never seen Volkanovski look tired in any of his fights. He's a cardio machine, and even on short notice, he's the kind of fighter that could probably still go very hard. He's probably the kind of guy that is going to be, you know, in the gym working hard all the time, and this fight's obviously at lightweight, so it's not like he's going to have a really big weight cut or anything like that to have to go through, so that may help his cardio, his conditioning as well. So Volkanovski taking the fight on short notice, which is obviously a concern, but at the same time, you know, if anyone can pull it off, is Volk, because his cardio is absolutely incredible. If we take a look at the size difference between these two, obviously Makhachev's a lightweight, Volkanovski is a featherweight. We know there's going to be a size difference. Volkanovski actually has a 1 inch reach. It doesn't really mean much in the context of this fight, but obviously Makhachev, the bigger, the stronger, the more physically imposing man, with him being a weight class above Volkanovski. Now, before we get into how these two match up from a stylistic point of view, another X factor that I do want to touch on is that Volkanovski is pretty old for the lighter weight classes. He's had almost 30 pro fights. He's 35 years old, and while Volkanovski is undoubtedly pound for pound one of the best fighters in the world, pound for pound he might even be the best fighter in the world, Father Time's undefeated, and we know that when you hit mid-30s in the lighter weight classes, usually you hit that point in your career where you start to decline. And so, as much as I love Volkanovski, I don't think he's going to be able to continue performing at such a high level for too much longer. I think in the next year or two, we're probably going to start to see Volkanovski decline a lot. And in this matchup, going up a weight class, fighting on short notice against a bigger, stronger, more physically imposing opponent, Father Time can creep up on you very quickly at the stage of Volkanovski's career that he's in. So Volkanovski you can't say he's on a downward career trajectory, because he isn't. He's brilliant. But we have to start thinking about Volkanovski as a guy that may start to decline pretty soon, and that might start this weekend. In contrast, when you look at a guy like Islam Makhachev, even though the UFC kind of slow-rolled him for a while, where he was clearly one of the best lightweights in the world, but they weren't throwing him into that title picture straight away. It took him a long time to work his way into a title shot. I feel now that he is in the title picture, he's being pushed like very quickly. Because if you look at Makhachev's record, you know, he went from fighting guys like Bobby Green, Thiago Moises, Dan Hooker, to some of the pound-for-pound best fighters in the world like Alexander Volkanovski, literally within 2 or 3 fights. It's been a big step up for him. And that is a very, very important factor to take into consideration, in my opinion, in this fight. Because if you go back and watch Volkanovski and Makhachev's first fight, it was razor close. It was super competitive. And that's amazing, right? What Volkanovski was able to achieve against a guy a lot younger, a lot bigger than him. But a part of me also feels like Volkanovski also had a little bit of the element of surprise on his side, where I know Charles Oliveira is a very good fighter, but ultimately Oliveira was a BJJ guy, and we know that Makhachev's level of combat sambo would probably be too much for Oliveira, and Oliveira would probably get overwhelmed. We also know Oliveira fades a lot as fights wear on. With Volkanovski, he never fades, and his defensive wrestling's pretty good. So Volkanovski posed threats to Makhachev in ways that Charles Oliveira didn't. And you can remember, we bet Makhachev to beat Oliveira, right, back when they fought. It was a very good stylistic matchup for Makhachev. A much easier stylistic matchup than Volk. And so when I look at the Makhachev-Volkanovski fight, the first time they fought, for me, it's extremely impressive how Makhachev goes from facing guys like Thiago Moises and Bobby Green, and then within a year, like, jumps into fights against one of the best fighters on the planet. That is super impressive to me, because there was no, like, slow burn into that fight. There was no, like, gradual ramp up in the level of opponent that Makhachev was facing. He didn't, you know, face a few top 15 guys, then a few top 10, then a few top 5, and then he starts to face the best fighters in the world. He literally goes from Bobby Green to Alexander Volkanovski in the space of 2 fights. And so one thing I'm really, really conscious of in this matchup is that even though their first fight was competitive, Volk was a massive step up in competition for Makhachev, and ultimately, Makhachev still won the fight. He got through by the skin of his teeth, a very fine margin, but he still got the job done. And so you've really got to ask yourself if Makhachev was able to get the job done when Volk had the element of surprise on his side and Makhachev didn't really know what to expect from him, and it was his first title defense. It was the first time he'd faced the guy that could deal with his offensive wrestling. It was a massive step up in competition for Makhachev, and he still got the job done. You have to ask yourself why I've gone blurry, and we need to fix this. There we go. And you also need to ask yourself, how much Makhachev will have learnt from that first fight and how much he's likely to improve. Because if you look at his record, no one apart from Arman Tazrukian had ever really tested him. And so now he's got experience of what it's like to go 5 hard rounds. He's got experience what it's like to deal with a guy that you can't take down and hold down easily. He's got experience of facing a really high level opponent in a 5-round war. So for me, I think it's going to be a much more difficult fight for Volkanovski this time around. Because I think Makhachev will be way better prepared. He'll have a way better idea of how to pace himself. He'll know exactly what to expect. And so this fight is a lot easier for Makhachev second time round, in my opinion, especially because Volkanovski's coming in on short notice. So I just think it's important to get that out there before we start talking about how they match up from a stylistic point of view. Now, in terms of how they match up from a stylistic point of view, when you go back and watch their first fight, what is really notable to me is that neither guy really has that big of an advantage anywhere. What you notice about their first fight is that both guys have big moments, and these big moments are pretty much what determine the scoring of each round. In terms of, in one round, Makhachev will outstrike Volk and land a big shot. In another round, Volk will outstrike Makhachev, land a big shot. In another round, Makhachev will have a lot of grappling control, and then, like the fourth round, for example, and if you look at the fifth round, like Volk will have some success with grappling. So it was one of those fights where it was very even everywhere, actually. Makhachev struggled to get Volk down and rack up a lot of top control for too long. There were a couple times in the fight where he managed to do it, but outside of that, he struggled. And both guys had their moments on the feet. But what I noticed is, for the most part, the fight was decided by big moments. One guy hitting a big shot there, one guy giving up a takedown there, one guy looking tired there. But you certainly, from a technical point of view, couldn't really give a particularly big advantage to either guy anywhere. Makhachev did better with his grappling early on, struggled a little bit late on as he started to get tired, but Volkanovski's still very difficult to take down and, control. He's just very scrambly, doesn't accept being put in bad positions, very, very good at working his way back up to his feet. Like, Makhachev did get some takedowns, did obtain some dominant positions, but outside of that period in round 4 where he had back control, didn't achieve a whole lot on the ground, didn't really score. Volkanovski did a really good job of working his way through any bad position he was put in very quickly. So this matchup, for me, does have the potential to be razor close, because whenever you're dealing with two really well-matched fighters, and you're kind of looking towards big moments like late takedowns, big shots, knockdowns, things like that to decide the outcome of a fight, it could obviously go either way. My lean is definitely Makhachev. There's no doubt about it. He's younger. He's got the size advantage. I expect him to be a lot better now that he's already fought Volkanovski once. He knows exactly what to expect, and he'll learn so much from that. Volk is also taking the fight on short notice. So for me, like, it's a no-brainer picking Makhachev in this fight. There's no way I would be betting Volkanovski here. But with how big of a favourite Makhachev is, and with how close and competitive their first fight was, I can't be betting Makhachev at these odds, because you can't count Volkanovski out ever. One other thing that I would say, I've got to kind of just throw this in there, for anyone like really tempted to roll the dice on Volkanovski here, and I understand why people might want to roll the dice with him being a reasonably big underdog. Let me know if you guys are going to be betting Volkanovski this weekend. But one thing that I would say to make you very cautious about betting Volkanovski this weekend is, obviously this event is going to be in Abu Dhabi, and I would imagine the crowd are really going to be behind Makhachev. And so if this were a close competitive fight, home advantage could come into play, and I would imagine that the judges would lean more towards Makhachev. It might not happen, but I think it's more likely to. From my perspective, it's very unlikely Volk dominates Makhachev here. Obviously, Volk could win the fight, but I think at best, if Volk wins the fight, it's going to be like a hard-fought, close competitive matchup. It's not very likely that Volk would finish Makhachev, because if you look at Volk's record, he's an absolute decisionator. Very, very rarely finishes guys. Most of his fights go the distance. So it's not that likely Volk finishes Makhachev. So then you look at how else could Volk win. It would have to be by decision. But because they were so well matched in their first fight, I don't see Volk completely dominating Makhachev. So then you have to ask yourself the question, if we know there is a very, very good chance this fight is going to be close and competitive, what are the odds that Volk wins a close decision against a guy like Makhachev, who will essentially have the crowd on his side home advantage will probably come into play, right? It's just I just feel that a lot has to go in Volk's favour in order for him to win this, which means I don't think it's a particularly good position to put your money, because I think it's going to be a real uphill battle for Volk to win this fight for all the reasons we've mentioned. Let me just refresh this to make sure we've got the latest odds on the props. So if we take a look at the over-under on this one, because of how tough both guys are, I do think there's a pretty good chance this goes the distance. It won't be easy for either guy to get a finish here. I don't like betting on fights to go to a decision when they're 5-rounders, because 25 minutes is an absolute eternity in the octagon. But pretty likely this one goes the distance, in my opinion. I'm not going to be betting the over-under on this. But if you do want to bet the over-under, I would go with the over, or the fight goes to a decision. In terms of the prop bets on this, the only one I would consider would be Makhachev to win by decision, but again, the odds are really bad. So, yeah, not great. Not great. The odds aren't great. And so as a result, I would probably pass on that as well. So I hope you found that useful. If you did, let me know what you think in the comments below. And let me know if you're going to be betting this fight. Let me know if you think I've missed anything out. Subscribe if you haven't already. I would really appreciate it. It would help the channel to grow. Now let's break down the co-main event, where we've got another short notice call-up as Kamaru Usman steps up to take on Khamzat Chimaev on very, very short notice. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Chimaev is a pretty big favourite at average odds of about 1.33, which is going to be minus 303 for an implied probability of 75%. If we take a look at the odds on Usman, he's around an average of 3.45, which is going to be plus 245 for an implied probability of 29%. So loads of X factors to talk about on this one. Where do we even begin? Usman is 36 years old, 6 foot tall with a 76-inch reach. Chimaev, 29 years old, 6 foot 2 with a 75-inch reach. So both guys roughly the same size. There's obviously a decent difference in age, with Chimaev being 7 years younger than Usman. So statistically, that means the younger fighter wins around 65% of the time, which does give Chimaev an advantage. On top of that, both these guys are also at that stage in their careers where I feel that age statistic is really meaningful, and we talk about this every week, where statistics are only as useful as how well you interpret them. And if you've got a 33-year-old fighting a 26-year-old, then statistically the 26-year-old probably doesn't really have an advantage, even though there's a 7-year age gap in the fight, because the 26-year-old is going to be, you know, a lot less experienced than the 33-year-old, and the 33-year-old is still going to be in their prime. But when you look at the age of these two, you know, Chimaev has just turned 29 a few months ago, and Usman, 36 years old. Usman's at that stage in his career, approaching his late 30s, where you'd start to expect him to be declining a lot from fight to fight, and we all know about his extensive knee injuries that he's been battling with for years now. So Usman should be starting to decline quite rapidly. Haven't seen signs of it yet, but, you know, Father Time is undefeated, and, you know, 36 years old is very old for a fighter that's had 23 pro fights, suffering from chronic knee injuries, and has spent so much time in the octagon having so many wars. Whereas Chimaev at 29 years old, he's going to be making big improvements from fight to fight. There's nowhere near as much wear and tear on his body. He's had so many fights where he's just run through guys. He's got half the number of fights that Usman does. And so both guys definitely at different stages in their career, with, you know, Usman being on that downward trajectory, Chimaev being on that upward trajectory. And so it's a pretty big deal. Age matters. It's a young man's game, and Usman is fighting on borrowed time, as they say. In terms of other X factors, I mean, we've still got way more X factors to come. Usman moving up a weight class, fighting Chimaev at middleweight. Now, we've never seen Usman at middleweight before. I think Chimaev had some fights against lower level opponents earlier in his career at middleweight. Kevin Holland fight was at catchweight. So this is the first time we're going to see either guy in the middleweight division in the UFC. Actually, that's not true. Chimaev did fight Gerald Meerschaert at middleweight, I think. He did. But there's obviously a big difference between, you know, going up against someone like Usman, going up against someone like Gerald Meerschaert. What we know is that both guys are absolutely huge for the welterweight division. So they could look better than ever at middleweight when they don't have that absolutely brutal weight cut to go through. Chimaev in particular, when you look at his neck, his upper body, he always looks a little bit unhealthy at welterweight. He's absolutely massive. So I think the fact this fight is taking place at middleweight will be a good thing for both guys, because Usman's coming on short notice, so he doesn't have to face a brutal weight cut. And obviously Chimaev is a massive welterweight, so you know, he won't have to deplete his body cutting down to 170 pounds. But that segues nicely into the fact that Usman is also coming in on short notice. Chimaev was obviously preparing for his fight against Boraquinha, Paulo Costa, and so will have had a very good training camp for this matchup. Whereas Usman coming off the bench on less than 2 weeks' notice against one of the best fighters in the UFC, certainly one of the best MMA grapplers I've ever seen. It's not going to be easy. And then the final X factor that we've got to talk about, maybe I've forgotten one of the X factors. There's so much to talk about that I maybe missed something, but obviously video surfaced earlier on of Kamaru Usman, Justin Gaethje at the open workouts, and it appeared that while Usman took Gaethje down, he said that something popped. And so I'm not going to play the audio from this video clip because the audio is not very good, and so I don't think it'll sound particularly good on this YouTube video. Go check it out for yourself if you want to watch it. Basically there, as you see Usman say something to Gaethje, it sounds like he says there's something popped. It's not super clear what he says though, and Gaethje tweeted out that he said I'm good or something like that. I thought he hit his head on the mat. I asked him if he hit his head in this clip when we got up, and he said no. I don't agree. I don't know if me saying I don't agree with Gaethje here is the appropriate or correct thing to say, because ultimately Gaethje was there, right? And I don't want to call Gaethje a liar, and he was closer to the situation than I was. But what I would say is, you almost certainly hear Usman say the word popped. Like, the audio is not clear. In fact, let's just play it. And let me know what you think. If you're in the Discord community, let me know in the comments below. Do you agree with Gaethje? Or do you think Usman said something popped? It isn't clear. It's definitely inconclusive. The audio's not great. Have a listen. I'll play it 2 or 3 times. So we go back into that part. Definitely sounds like he said something popped, right? It's like you kind of hear the word pop. It's inconclusive though. The audio's terrible. I don't know. Anyway, it's something else for us to talk about, right? Because, you know, Usman's coming on short notice. He's a lot older than Chimaev. We know that his knees are badly injured anyway. It's just one of those things where that video clip's inconclusive, but I do think it adds a bit more risk to betting Usman in this fight. But let me know what you think in the Discord, or let me know what you think in the YouTube comments. Keen to get your thoughts. Now, let's get into how these two match up from a stylistic point of view. There's so many X factors on this fight. I might have missed some just because I can't remember what I've said. So I might have missed some out. Apologies. Let me know if I have missed anything. But I think I covered everything. Short notice. Moving up a weight class. Knee injuries. Age. Something popped video. I think that's everything. let me know. Alright, so in terms of how these two match up stylistically, personally, Chimaev is one of the best MMA grapplers I've ever seen. And I know he hasn't fought a particularly high level of opponent up until this point in his career, but it goes back to what I say regularly, where you don't have to face like a super high level of opponent and demonstrate a level of skill against that super high level of opponent to know the level that someone is at. So for me, it doesn't matter whether Chimaev is fighting Gilbert Burns or Rhys McKee. You can still see by the way he moves on the ground, by the way he handles himself, by the way he conducts himself on the ground, that he's an extremely high level MMA grappler. So this is a really, really interesting fight, because Chimaev's biggest strength is his grappling. And Usman has also, obviously built a career off being an extremely high-level MMA grappler. And so what's really interesting about this fight is this might be the first time in both of their careers where they won't have an advantage over their opponent grappling. I mean, maybe you could say that was the case when Usman fought Colby, because Colby is obviously a former NCAA Division I level wrestler. But for the most part, Usman's got an advantage on the ground over pretty much anyone that he's ever fought. And the same is definitely true for Chimaev. No one he's fought is on his level on the ground. And so it's really difficult to gauge how these two match up when it comes to grappling, because both are at such a high level that it's difficult for me to visualize either one of these guys being taken down, held down, and controlled. Now, out of the two, I think it is more likely that Chimaev has the advantage on the ground, simply because his style of grappling seems more physically imposing. He's more dangerous with his submission game. His grappling control seems heavier and tighter. But Usman, at the level he's at, is not going to be easy to take down and hold down. We know that for a fact. So, very difficult to give either guy the edge when it comes to grappling. My lean would be Chimaev. However, and this segues nicely into how these two match up when it comes to striking, the two things that have defined, well, actually, there's a few things that have defined Usman's career, right? But two of the things that have defined Usman's career are, his grappling for sure, which we've spoken about, but also his cardio. And Usman's a guy that can just go hard relentlessly for 25 minutes and never slow down. I don't think I've ever even seen Usman breathing heavy. And I can't remember the last time we saw Usman in a 3-rounder. He's been in that welterweight title picture for so long that it feels like every time we see him, it's a 25-minute, 5-round fight. Obviously, this fight against Chimaev is a 3-rounder. And so, if Usman's cardio is off the charts at welterweight, where he's got a big weight cut and the fights are 5-rounders, imagine the pace Usman may be able to go at when he's not having to cut weight, or he probably will have to cut weight, but not going to have anywhere near as difficult a weight cut as he would have had dropping to welterweight. Not dropping to welterweight, fighting at welterweight. And only having to go 3 rounds instead of 5. Like, Usman's output, his cardio for this fight could be off the charts. Now, on the flip side, obviously he's coming on short notice, but I'll say the same about Usman that I said about Alexander Volkanovski. Volkanovski's a cardio machine, and so is Usman. If anyone can pull off fighting at a high pace on short notice, it's guys like Usman and guys like Volkanovski. And this is really, 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 really notable to me, because the only time that we've ever seen Chimaev involved in a competitive fight was when he fought Gilbert Burns. He's made very, very quick work of everybody else that he's ever faced. Lots of quick finishes, and even the fights that went into round 2, his opponents didn't really offer up any resistance. It was total domination. None of them were able to make him work hard. That wasn't the case with Gilbert Burns. Gilbert made Chimaev work hard for takedowns, would scramble up to his feet when he got taken down, would really challenge and test Chimaev when it came to striking. And so in the Gilbert Burns fight, Chimaev slowed down a lot after about 7 or 8 minutes, started to look really sloppy, and when Chimaev got tired, his striking defense went out the window and he looked very sloppy on the feet, very hittable, and as a result Gilbert Burns was able to wobble him in the second and third rounds. In fact, he knocked him down at the end of round 2. And that's really interesting because Gilbert Burns is a fighter that also slows down a lot as fights wear on. You guys remember, we bet Belal Muhammad to beat Gilbert Burns for that reason. Gilbert Burns is also a lot smaller than both Usman and Chimaev. Remember, Burns started life in the UFC as a lightweight, and now you've got Usman and Chimaev fighting at middleweight. 3 weight classes above lightweight, 2 weight classes, whatever, you get what I'm saying. And so if a guy like Chimaev is struggling to take down and hold down a much smaller guy like Burns, and he's getting really tired against a guy like Gilbert Burns, if Usman shows up and performs like he usually does, this could be a really, really, really difficult fight for Chimaev. Because if we look at Chimaev's past performances, very unlikely he's going to be able to take Usman down and dominate him like he's done to so many guys up until this point in his career. I won't rule it out. At 36 years old on short notice, moving up a weight class, Usman could look terrible on Saturday night. It's possible. Father Time's undefeated. But going off past performances, Usman's high-level MMA grappling, Chimaev's inability to really impose himself on the ground against Gilbert Burns, I think it's fair that we would all agree Usman is a better MMA grappler than Gilbert Burns. In that context, Chimaev will likely struggle to implement a grappling-heavy game plan against Usman. Therefore, you'd think this would predominantly be a stand-up fight. And if it's a stand-up fight, what we know from Usman based on his 2 fights against Colby and his 2 fights against Edwards is that Usman can go hard for 5 rounds, let alone 3 rounds. He's got a great chin, he can fight at a high pace, and he can inflict damage on the feet. Based on what I've seen, Usman is a better striker than Chimaev. Like I say, Chimaev, sloppy, bad defensively, and it gets worse as he gets tired, which in the Gilbert Burns fight was around about the midway of the fight. Now, I'll say the same about Chimaev that I said about Islam Makhachev. That was Chimaev's first real test. Gilbert Burns has been floating around the top 5 rankings of the welterweight division since fucking forever. So, again, it was a big step up in competition for Chimaev. He went from facing guys like Rhys McKee and Gerald Meerschaert to 2 fights later taking on one of the best welterweights in the world in Gilbert Burns. So it's impressive that Chimaev in his first real test was still able to get the job done, was still able to win, and he will have learned so much from that fight in terms of how to pace himself, how to prepare for a 5-rounder, right? What to expect. But if Chimaev performs like he did against Burns, and Usman performs like he has in any of his recent fights, really, I think Usman's going to cause Chimaev a lot of problems. So what does all this mean from a betting point of view? It means it's a complicated fight. For me, I do favour Chimaev, but he's completely unplayable at these odds. He's way too big of a favourite. So then if we look at a bet on Usman, his odds are really attractive at these underdog odds. There's no doubt about that, especially when you look at how much Chimaev struggled against Burns. But for me, I like to find bets where I can overwhelmingly stack the odds in my favour. And when I look at Usman, I just don't think he fits that criteria. He's old, he's injured, obviously suffering with those knee injuries. You've got the video with Justin Gaethje, which says, suggested Usman may have said something popped. He's coming on short notice. He's moving up a weight class to middleweight. And I know this is essentially 2 welterweights fighting at middleweight, but still, we've never seen Usman at middleweight before, and sometimes when we see guys move up a weight class, they're just a lot slower, they're a lot more sluggish, their cardio isn't as good because they're carrying all that extra body mass, or all that extra weight in the octagon. So personally, I think this is one of those fights where it's dog or pass. If you really, really, really want to bet this fight, you have to take Usman. He gives you the better risk to reward ratio. But my lean is Chimaev, and for me, there's just too many risk factors with Usman for me personally to want to bet him here. If you take a look at the over-under on this one, though, I quite like the over 1.5 rounds, and I'll probably be betting that. I think over 1.5 rounds, with how tough both guys are, is a pretty good bet. And if we take a look at the props on this one, the only prop I would consider is Chimaev by decision. Because again, I will say the same with Chimaev that I said about Islam Makhachev. This fight's in Abu Dhabi. If it ends up being a close fight, which I think it will, I don't think it's that likely either guy dominates. If this turns out to be a close competitive matchup, home advantage probably comes into play, and with Chimaev having the crowd behind him, the judges probably give Chimaev the nod. So Chimaev by decision is the only prop I would consider. I'm not going to be betting that myself, but if you really want to sprinkle a little bit of money on this fight to make watching more interesting, I do think that's the most likely prop to hit. So I hope you found that useful. If you did, please let me know by leaving a comment below or in the Discord. I would really appreciate it. So now let's break down the next fight on this card, which is going to be Magomed Ankalaev against Johnny Walker. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Ankalaev is a pretty big favourite at average odds of around 1.28, which is going to be minus 357 for an implied probability of 78%. If we take a look at the odds on Johnny Walker, he's around an average of 3.80, which is going to be plus 280 for an implied probability of 26%. So Ankalaev is 31 years old, 6'3", with a 75-inch reach. Johnny Walker, 31 years old, 6'6", with an 82-inch reach. So both guys the same age, and we can see Johnny Walker, pretty notable size advantage here. He's 3 inches taller, but has a massive 7-inch reach advantage over Ankalaev, which statistically gives him around a 65% chance of winning, 67%, something like that, which is a pretty big statistical advantage. And what we also know is whereas earlier in his career Johnny Walker didn't do a particularly good job of using that reach because he was one of these guys who would just kind of blitz and bum rush his opponents and look to overwhelm him with his power and his aggression. What we know these days is since Johnny Walker's been training at SBG Ireland, he's much more technical on the feet, much more strategic, much more measured, and these days he's doing a far better job of using his size, his reach, his length to his advantage. So having a 7-inch reach advantage is great for Walker in this fight because we know Ankalaev likes to stand in front of you. He likes to box. And that 7-inch reach advantage will make it a lot harder for Ankalaev to get inside and let his hands go. Now, if we look at how these two match up from a stylistic point of view, I personally feel Ankalaev is the best fighter in the light heavyweight division by some margin. If we want to talk about skill for skill, I don't think there's anyone anywhere near the level of Ankalaev. Forget about Jiri Prohaska, forget about Jamal Hill. In my humble opinion, no one is anywhere near the level of Ankalaev, because when you look at guys like Jiri, when you look at guys like Jamal Hill, technically they've got a lot of weaknesses, right? Jamal Hill's ground game's not the best. Jiri is wild, he's reckless, he's sloppy, he slows down as the fight wears on. His ground game's not the best either. When you look at Ankalaev, he's a total package. He's got great cardio, he's got a great chin, high-level combat sambo, so his MMA grappling is amazing, and he's a very technical striker as well. So Ankalaev is incredible in my opinion. He's a brilliant light heavyweight. The problem with Ankalaev is that he's missing arguably the most important component in a fighter, and that is, I want to say intelligence, but that's a really disrespectful thing to say because it makes it sound like I'm calling Ankalaev stupid, which is not what I'm trying to do. But GSP famously said the fighting was 90% mental. And I think a big part of that was, or a big part of what GSP meant when he said that, was fighters having a strong mentality, right? No quitting them. You know, guys like Michael Chandler or an Eddie Alvarez who will keep fighting till their last breath. And don't get me wrong, Ankalaev definitely has that. But I think another aspect to what GSP said, or another element to what GSP said, where he said fighting was 90% mental, also comes down to fight IQ and strategy and game planning and making intelligent decisions in fights. And this is an area where Ankalaev is particularly bad. So you want to talk about wrestling? My opinion, Ankalaev best wrestler in the division. You want to talk about striking? My opinion, Ankalaev one of the best strikers in the division. But you can have all the skills in the world. If you don't apply them correctly, it doesn't mean anything. Because if you make bad decisions in fights, it's going to hold you back. And his fight against Jan Blachowicz was a great example of this. We know 3 things about Jan Blachowicz, and people always disagree with me on these 3 things, but if you actually watch Blachowicz's fights, these 3 things have been proven over and over and over again, time and time again. The 3 things we know about Jan Blachowicz: number 1, he slows down as fights wear on. Number 2, his takedown offense is not very good. Number 3, Blachowicz is painfully weak off his back. We absolutely know those 3 things. So if you're Magomed Ankalaev and you have amazing wrestling, an amazing ground game, an amazing cardio, and you go into that fight against Blachowicz, you know that if you go into that fight with a grappling heavy game plan, you're going to dominate. It's as simple as that. Maybe Blachowicz catches you with a flash KO or something, but outside of that, 9 times out of 10, you go into the fight with Blachowicz, you're going to win. You're going to dominate because he just doesn't have the cardio to keep up with your pace. He doesn't have the takedown and defense and ground game to stop your wrestling for 5 rounds. And we saw that with how much success Ankalaev had in the second half of the fight when he started to grapple. But what did we see Ankalaev do? We saw him try to win a kickboxing match early, which enabled Blachowicz to destroy his legs with leg kicks. And by the time Ankalaev started to grapple in the second half of the fight, he'd already dropped too many rounds to Blachowicz early in the fight, in the first few rounds, which meant the fight ended a draw. So Ankalaev basically beat himself against Blachowicz. It should have been a cakewalk. Literally the entire fight could have looked like the later rounds where Ankalaev dominated Blachowicz on the ground, but he barely tried to shoot a takedown until the second half of the fight, and by then it was too late. So the Blachowicz fight kind of reflected how bad Ankalaev's fight IQ is, because he could be the light heavyweight champion right now, but he isn't because he's stubborn and he let ego get the better of him. And so, you know, this isn't the first time we've seen Ankalaev make these mistakes. He made the same mistake against Thiago Santos, and yes, he got the win against Santos, but again, Santos is a guy that we know has bad takedown offense and a bad ground game. Yet Ankalaev was determined to prove a point and win a kickboxing match, which he did. But then when he utilised a similar game plan and strategy against Jan, it cost him, because he got his legs destroyed, and by the time he fucking started to use his grappling, he was down too big on the scorecards to recover. And so, I've gone blurry again, apologies, I don't know why this keeps happening, very annoying, but we will fix it for the next video. So yeah, Ankalaev is a guy with really bad fight IQ, because we know Johnny Walker's got true legit one-shot knockout power. He's capable of knocking out anyone in the division. If Ankalaev comes into this fight with a grappling heavy game plan, he should dominate, because we know Walker's takedown offense isn't great. We know he's very low level on the ground. We know Walker's also one of these guys that slows down a lot if you make him grapple. His striking cardio has improved a lot, and his striking cardio is very good these days. But making him grapple still slows quite a bit. We saw that in the tongue twister in the Nikita Krylov fight. So if Ankalaev grapples here, Walker is screwed. You know, Walker's a big guy. Ankalaev may struggle to get him down early, but if he persists with that grappling, continues to use chain wrestling, he will inevitably get Walker down. There's no doubt about that. But if Ankalaev tries to win a kickboxing match here, things will get really dicey for him, because he's fighting a big guy, hits very hard, has a huge 7-inch reach advantage. And we've seen Ankalaev get dinged in the past, right? We've seen him get wobbled on the feet. We've seen him eat big shots. If he doesn't show Walker the respect he deserves on the feet, Ankalaev could get caught with something and get himself knocked out. I don't think it's going to be that easy for Walker to outstrike Ankalaev. Ankalaev's very good defensively, very technical. But who knows, man? So this is one of those fights where if it stays standing, I think it's going to be really competitive. I think it's going to be really close. If Ankalaev uses a grappling heavy game plan, I think he will absolutely dominate Johnny Walker and it won't be a contest. So from a betting point of view, can't bet Ankalaev. His odds are too steep, and with his desire to kind of get into these crazy like firefights and these big exchanges and put on these like wars on the feet, it just isn't smart to bet Ankalaev in this odds range, because Walker's a very dangerous striker and he's capable of knocking out anyone that tries to stand in front of him for 15 minutes. Having said that, Walker has a giant hole in his skill set, which Ankalaev is very well positioned to exploit. Walker's pretty low level on the ground. Ankalaev, very, very high level MMA grappler. And so, because there's that big skill gap there and that big path to victory for Ankalaev, I've got no interest in betting on Walker as a big underdog. This fight's really dead from a betting point of view. If we take a look at the over-under on this one, the over 1.5 rounds is pretty tempting. It is pretty tempting. I'm not going to go for it though, because like I say, both guys are kind of reckless. Both guys are quite, well, it's tricky. Ankalaev's good defensively, but he puts himself in a lot of danger. We were talking about this with the Adrian Yanez and Jonathan Martinez fight last week, where both those guys very much like to exchange and bet on their chin against their opponent. Ankalaev does the same. He's got no problem coming forward, getting in the boxing range and exchanging, which can be a dangerous thing to do with Walker when he's throwing all kinds of spinning shit and trying to kill you. So, yeah, it's one of those fights which I could see a quick finish in it. I think it's more likely to go deep because Walker's fighting safer and smarter these days. But both guys are very dangerous. It only takes one shot, from either guy, and it could be all over. So in terms of the props, I think Ankalaev by, I don't know actually. I don't know. This one could be a war. Yeah, I don't really love the props. I was going to say Ankalaev by decision, but the odds aren't great. Yeah, I would probably give the props a miss on that. Nothing really jumping out at me there. So I hope you found that useful. Now let's break down the next fight on this card, which is going to be Ikram Aliskerov against Volkanovski Alves. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Aliskerov is one of the biggest favourites on the card. The average odds are around 1.16, which is going to be minus 625 for an implied probability of 86%. If we take a look at the odds on Volkanovski Alves, he's around an average of 5.7, which is going to be plus 470 for an implied probability of 18%. So Aliskerov is 30 years old, 6 foot tall with a 76-inch reach, and Volkanovski Alves, 32 years old, 5'11", with a 72-inch reach. So we can see that both guys roughly the same age. Aliskerov is a bit taller than Alves and has a 4-inch reach advantage, which is very, very nice. So this is one of those fights where it is a very bad stylistic matchup for Volkanovski Alves. The odds are probably a bit wide here, to be fair. I think Alves deserves more credit than the odds are giving him, simply because he is a dangerous guy. He's got a dangerous submission game. He does have knockout power. But skill for skill, if he doesn't finish Aliskerov in this fight, he's almost certainly going to get outworked, either standing up or on the ground. Volkanovski Alves, we start by talking about grappling first of all. Volkanovski Alves is a high-level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. He's trained with Jacare for a long time, trained with Anderson Silva. All those guys are black house. But Aliskerov has got, really good MMA grappling, combat sambo background, good offensive wrestling, good grappling control. And we know Alves is also one of these guys that if you make him grapple, he does tire out pretty quickly. And we haven't seen Aliskerov involved in any like crazy knockdown, drag out, back and forth wars where he's forced to burn through loads of energy. But his cardio looks reasonably good. And so if both these two, start to grapple, you'd imagine that Aliskerov, with his combat sambo background, has got the skills to neutralise the threat of Volley Alves' submission game and outwork Alves on the ground, beat him up, wear him down, win the fight with grappling. Now, when it comes to striking, Aliskerov, to be fair, is one of these combat sambo guys that does like to dabble when it comes to striking. He's not one of these guys like a Khabib that will just come out spamming takedowns. He does like to fuck around a little bit on the feet. And Wally Alves got to be given some respect. He's got knockout power. His biggest weapon on the feet are his leg kicks. But it's one of those fights where Aliskerov does stay very busy on the feet. He does throw a high volume of strikes, and you feel that if any point in the fight Alves starts to build momentum or have success in the fight with striking, that's the point at which Aliskerov is then going to kind of, go to his grappling, and that's when Alves is going to be in a lot of trouble. So it's a very good fight for Alves. Good stylistic matchup. The odds reflect that. Unfortunately, Aliskerov is a massive favourite, and so not very much upside in betting him at all. Big risk betting him at these odds. On the flip side, Alves, not very likely to win, so I certainly wouldn't want to be betting that. Very difficult fight for betting. Not really a particularly good risk to reward betting either guy. In terms of the over-under on this one, it's one of those fights where I think it is more likely to end under 1.5 rounds. It's more likely not to go to a decision just because Alves does have a habit of like caving mentally and breaking. Aliskerov's going to have the crowd behind him. He is an aggressive guy. Having said that, I wouldn't necessarily call Aliskerov like particularly dangerous. He's more of a grinder. He's won his last 2 fights very quickly, but prior to that, this fight went to a decision. This one went deep. This one went deep. This one went deep. This one went to a decision. Aliskerov's more one of these guys that breaks you down with his work rate and volume, as opposed to like a deadly submission game or big legit knockout power. So yeah, man. If it does end quickly, it'll probably be because Alves kind of like waves the white flag, doesn't want to play anymore. But my lean would be over 1.5 rounds at dog odds, 2.20 plus 120. But because Alves has got the quit in him, at times caves mentally, I'm not going to be betting that myself. I'll sit that one out. In terms of the props on this one, so Aliskerov to win by knockout or TKO, pretty steep favourite odds. Yeah, I don't really like the odds on this one. I would give the props a miss. Haven't really got much there for you, unfortunately. So I hope you found that useful. Now let's break down one of the most interesting fights on this entire card, which is going to be Said Nurmagomedov against Muin Gafurov. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Nurmagomedov is the favourite at average odds of around 1.44, which is going to be minus 227 for an implied probability of 69%. If we take a look at the odds on his opponent, Gafurov, he's around an average of 2.80, which is going to be plus 180 for an implied probability of 36%. So Nurmagomedov is 31 years old, 5'8", with a 70-inch reach. Gafurov, 27 years old, 5'7", with a 68-inch reach. So both guys, there's not a massive difference in age or size here. No real major X factors. Let's dig into how these two match up from a stylistic point of view. And it's just a very complicated fight stylistically. I don't even know where to begin with this one. I don't even know where to begin. Let's start off with cardio. because that kind of forms the foundation for most of the stuff that I want to talk about with this one. So both these guys slow down as fights wear on, but they both slow down for very different reasons. So Nurmagomedov slows down because his cardio isn't great, and he's just the kind of guy that does slow down as fights wear on. Gafurov, on the other hand, slows down because he just fights at an insane pace. He literally redlines it from the first second of the fight to the last. He never stops working. He never stops trying to punch you in the face. Never stops trying to take you down. And so there's an interesting dynamic going on here, because no matter what pace Nurmagomedov fights at, slow pace, high pace, he will slow. Gafurov slows because his output is so high. So the way I would look at this is, if Gafurov fights at the pace that he usually does, Nurmagomedov is not going to be able to keep up with him. And Nurmagomedov is going to tire out at a far more rapid rate than Gafurov does. Because Gafurov slows at like an insane pace, right? Said is really going to struggle keeping up with that pace. So I would imagine he's going to potentially slow down much earlier in this fight compared to a lot of his other fights, because Gafurov fights at a higher pace than most of his other opponents. I hope I made sense with that. In my head, I've got what I'm trying to say. I'm not sure if I've explained myself particularly well. Let me know in Discord if I didn't do a good job of explaining myself, and then I will kind of try and explain it better. But yeah, what I'm trying to say is, even though they both slow down, it's way worse the side Nurmagomedov slows, because he ain't going to be able to go as hard as Gafurov can. So he's likely going to be a lot more tired than Gafurov in this fight. But there's things Nurmagomedov can do to slow Gafurov down, and we'll talk about that. So in terms of how let's talk about striking first. Things are even more complicated when it comes to grappling. In terms of striking, they've both got very different styles of striking. Nurmagomedov is a guy that likes to stay on the outside and use his length to kind of chip away at you from a safe distance. He uses a lot of footwork and movement, which is one of the reasons why he slows down a lot, because his style of striking is the kind of style that does burn through a lot of energy. Gafurov, on the other hand, is a high pressure, aggressive, like relentless pressure fighter that just wants to come forward, take control of the center of the octagon, force you to engage. He's like a wild guy. So on the feet, I expect a lot of chaos, a lot of scrappy, ugly exchanges where Nurmagomedov wants time and space to get his kicks off, and Gafurov ain't going to give him that time and space. So on the feet, a lot of messy exchanges. I think it's going to be really difficult for Nurmagomedov to outwork Gafurov. Gafurov is one of these guys that just doesn't give you time and space on the feet, and Nurmagomedov needs time and space because he likes to fight in that wide stance, throw nice range-finding kicks. There ain't going to be none of that against Gafurov, because Gafurov doesn't let you fight at the range where that style is effective. Now, Nurmagomedov has great footwork, great movement. He can also mix things up very well. And this segues nicely into grappling, because we also know that Nurmagomedov is a very good offensive wrestler. And the problem with Gafurov's style is that because he's very aggressive and he's always coming forward, it's very easy to use his forward pressure and momentum against him to take him down. Gafurov's takedown offense isn't great. He's not great off his back. He's not great on the ground. But he is game. He is tough as nails. He is very scrappy. So this fight is really complicated because Nurmagomedov is pretty well positioned to exploit the one major weakness in Gafurov's skill set, which is Gafurov's takedown offense and ground game not being great. So Nurmagomedov should be able to take Gafurov down pretty easily. Therefore, Nurmagomedov has what he needs. Nurmagomedov has the strength to exploit Gafurov's biggest weaknesses. And that is why Nurmagomedov is the favourite. Where things get really complicated, though, is that Gafurov also has the strengths to exploit Nurmagomedov's biggest weakness, in that Gafurov fights at an insane pace. He's pretty comfortable and effective at fighting at that pace. And Nurmagomedov slows down a lot if you make him work hard. Therefore, he can't keep up with Gafurov's pace. Therefore, both guys do things that can cause the other major problems, which makes this a very interesting fight. I lean towards Nurmagomedov in this matchup, and the reason why I lean towards Nurmagomedov is that in order to make Nurmagomedov slow down in the fight, you have to make him work hard, and Gafurov is very good at doing that. However, Nurmagomedov's offensive wrestling and ground game enables him to dictate where the fight can take place, especially while he's fresh. So Nurmagomedov may be able to pace himself in this one by taking Gafurov down and obtaining dominant positions. I'll give you an example. In the third round of the Jonathan Martinez-Nurmagomedov fight, even though Nurmagomedov was tired, he was able to take Martinez down, get to Martinez's back, and run a few minutes off the clock from back control. Gafurov can't really make Nurmagomedov work hard if he's controlled and put in a bad position, in the sense that, say Nurmagomedov takes Gafurov down in round one, gets to his back, or gets into top position, and controls him from back control or top position for the majority of round one, then Nurmagomedov might not actually burn through that much energy, which means Nurmagomedov is going to be way fresher in rounds 2 and 3, because Gafurov couldn't really use his pace early in the fight to wear Nurmagomedov down. And so that's why I lean Nurmagomedov, because he can use grappling to pace himself and buy himself time, but he might not be able to. Gafurov's scrambly, he's a warhorse. It ain't going to be easy to get Gafurov down and control him, because Gafurov's always trying to work through bad positions. But that is why I lean towards Nurmagomedov. It's a very complex, interesting, deep fight. I'm looking forward to seeing how it goes, and you know, hopefully we can make some money on this one live betting, because it's a very complex fight. I've got a very good read on both these guys. I could see it going either way. I think it's more likely Nurmagomedov wins, but keep an open mind on it, man. It is a great fight. In terms of the over-under on this one, where are we? Here we go. So the over-under is set at in the even money odds range. I think it's more likely to go to a decision, actually. I think both guys are pretty tough, very well-rounded, not easy to get either of them out of there. I think it's pretty likely this fight goes to a decision. Probably not going to be betting it myself. The over 1.5 rounds is interesting. If you want to bet the over-under on this one, I think it's more likely it goes to a decision. If you look at Nurmagomedov's record, he frequently fights to a decision. If you look at Gafurov's record, he frequently fights to a decision as well. He's gone deep in this matchup. Decision there. So I do think it's more likely this fight goes to a decision, and you know, it's slight underdog odds. That's a sweetener. In terms of prop bets on this one, I'm not going to be betting this myself because I don't like props. But if you want to sprinkle a little bit of money on this fight to make watching it more interesting, I'll put myself in focus. And then I would go for Gafurov to win by decision. Odds of 5.5 plus 450. So I hope you found that useful. If you did, please hit the like button below. I would really appreciate it. Subscribe if you haven't already. Leave me a comment down below. Let me know who you're going to be betting this weekend. Thank you very much. Take care, everyone. Nice one, guys. And I will see you all very soon. Take care. Bye.